Hello friends. Thank you for being here. Each of you makes this channel alive and special. Thanks to your support, I can share stories, thoughts, and emotions that hopefully resonate in your heart. If you have just started exploring my content, welcome. Real-life stories are waiting for you here. Subscribe, like, and share your impressions. Your voice is very important to me. My son was present when they unveiled the will, sporting a smug smile as if he anticipated me being excluded from his mom's $34 million wealth. However, one brief sentence read by the lawyer turned everything upside down. Dustin's smile faded, and his outburst was so loud it seemed to make the office tremble. In my surprise, I dropped my coffee cup, which shattered on the linoleum as Mrs. Henderson's familiar complaints streamed through the wall, yelling about my sprinklers soaking her flowers once again. I picked up a dish towel and knelt to clean the mess. At 65, I'm still grappling with problems not entirely of my doing. The sprinkler system, installed just last month, had a loose joint that transformed the neighbor's lawn into a mini water park from time to time. I tried explaining the situation to Eleanor Henderson, but patience isn't one of her virtues. Just then, the phone started ringing. I decided to ignore it, focusing on the spilled coffee. But the persistent ringing cut through Eleanor's tirade about declining property values and inconsiderate neighbors. By the fifth ring, I finally stood up and flung the soggy towel into the sink. Jerry Flores speaking. Mr. Flores, this is Janet Morrison from Morrison Welsh and Associates in Cheyenne, said a woman's voice, carrying that polite, professional cadence that often hints at unpleasant news. I'm calling about Brianna Elizabeth Flores. My grip on the phone tightened. No one had addressed her by her full name around me for 15 years. What about her? Sir, I'm regretful to inform you that Mrs. Flores passed away on Tuesday evening. The funeral is scheduled for Friday at 2:15 at Riverside Memorial Chapel. The words hit me like a punch, and I collapsed into the kitchen chair, which groaned too loudly in the still air. Just 3 days ago, Tuesday evening, while I was fussing over sprinklers and coffee spills. Mr. Flores, are you still with us? Yeah, I'm here. My voice sounded strange, distant, even to me. How did you get my number? You were listed in Mrs. Flores's personal items as an emergency contact. I understand you were once married. Once married, 22 years reduced to a mere detail. Yeah, we divorced in 2010. The response was automatic, ingrained by years of filling out paperwork. We will be reading the will after the service, and you've been named as a beneficiary. Your presence is requested. Beneficiary? That sounded unreal, like a possibility from another world. Brianna had carved out a significant success post-divorce, her small consulting venture blooming into something unrecognizable from news updates. What could she possibly have left for me? Mr. Flores, will you be attending? Through the window, I saw Eleanor Henderson surveying her drenched flowers, hands on her hips, poised for another discussion. But her gripes seemed distant now, almost insignificant. What was the chapel name? Riverside Memorial on Grand Avenue. The service begins at 2, with a brief reception after. The will reading takes place at 4:30 in our downtown office. I nodded by instinct, even though she couldn't see me. I'll attend. After hanging up, I remained seated, staring at the phone as if it might ring again, bringing a different reality. Meanwhile, the coffee stains set in, dark spots needing a solid scrub. But I was frozen. I couldn't wrap my head around Brianna being gone. Brianna, lively and determined. Sunlight poured through the window, illuminating dust particles floating like a cloud of memories I'd fought hard to forget. Sitting there, the name Brianna Elizabeth Flores echoed in my mind, each syllable rewinding time to a snowy February night in 1987 at Murphy's Diner. I saw her again, wearing a red wool coat, challenging the diner manager about his hiring bias. You seriously won't consider a woman for the weekend manager position because you think they can't handle the pressure? Her voice cut through the near-empty diner, firm and unyielding. That might be the daftest thing I've heard all week. I stopped mid-bite of my apple pie, my fork suspended as I stared. The woman making waves turned slightly, showing off her sharp cheekbones and defined chin under a cascade of dark hair that sparkled under the fluorescent lights. Her anger added a certain beauty to her features, and I secretly hoped the manager would keep arguing just so she could continue to pick apart his flawed logic. I meant no offense, he offered weakly. Sure, she replied, obviously not convinced. It's never about offending, right? Just a little sprinkle of discrimination. She slid a business card across the counter. When you're ready to hire for talent instead of stereotypes, give me a call. The doorbell jingled as she left, and the diner felt emptier without her presence. I watched as she confidently got into a blue Honda Civic, adjusting the mirrors twice before smoothly merging into traffic. A true warrior who balanced caution and justice seamlessly. Quite the character, the manager muttered, loud enough for us all to hear. I stood up, leaving a $5 bill by my unfinished pie. No, I said, surprising myself with my own boldness. She's quite something. Her business card remained on the counter. Brianna Chen, business consultant. Before stepping into the chilly February afternoon, I made sure to memorize her number. It took me 3 whole days to work up the courage to call her. When I finally did, she answered on the second ring. Brianna Chen, came her brisk voice. Hi, it's Jerry Flores. We haven't officially met, but I saw you at Murphy's Diner last Friday night. There was a pause. The guy with the apple pie, and the one who had your back with the manager. Oh, you saw that? I went to grab my gloves from the car, and you tipped decently too. You could hear the smile in her voice. So, Jerry Flores, what can I do for you? How about dinner? Someplace much better than Murphy's. There was a longer pause this time. Are you asking for a date or business advice? I chuckled. Definitely a date, though tips on how to win over amazing women wouldn't hurt. Her laughter was genuine, not one of those forced chuckles. Saturday night, Romano's on 3rd, 7 o'clock. She showed up in the same striking red coat, but underneath, a black dress that made my heart race. Our conversation veered away from business to her life growing up in California, my work at a power plant, and mutual love for classic films and current novels. When she burst out laughing at my story about flooding my apartment fixing a leaky faucet, I knew I was in way over my head. 6 months later, at the very same diner, I placed an engagement ring exactly where her card had been. Marry me, Brianna Chen. Let's make me the happiest man in Wyoming. Her yes came before I even finished asking. Our wedding lit up September's skies with warm sunshine, the kind that makes anything seem possible. Brianna wore an heirloom dress, tailored to her elegant frame, carrying wildflowers we'd picked that morning. My hands trembled as I slid the ring onto hers. Forever, she whispered, and I had no doubt she meant it. Dustin joined us 2 years later, a lively little bundle who turned our peaceful home into a center full of purpose. Watching Brianna with our baby in her arms, her typical spirited self, made me wonder if life could ever get better. But even during those new parent days, her eyes occasionally flicked to a business magazine on the nightstand, hinting at bigger dreams. Dustin went from an energetic toddler to a curious student, and then I started noticing what I hadn't before. On his 7th birthday, Brianna got him a high-end computer, not a kiddie one, costing more than my paycheck. Knowing tech is essential, she said, as he explored software I didn't understand. The digital world belongs to them. My attempt to teach him fishing, sharing some old-fashioned charm, was brushed off with a laugh. By then, we'd moved to a bigger place on Hillrest Avenue, complete with 3 bathrooms and a massive kitchen island, a far cry from our old apartment. Brianna's consultancy was thriving, snagging big contracts, like one with a major mining company. We suddenly found ourselves with money to spend on things I never thought we'd need. Now, we had a housekeeper coming by twice a week, and our fridge dispensed ice at the press of a button. Dustin's room was crammed with toys, like a mini-store. Brianna seemed delighted, marveling at our fancy new dining room, complete with a chandelier and an enormous table for 12. "Isn't this fantastic?" she beamed. We could finally host parties in style. But truthfully, I missed our old, worn kitchen table, the one that had seen countless coloring sessions and late-night talks. This new one shimmered with every little mark, always needing coasters and placemats. The entertaining kicked off immediately. Suddenly, we were surrounded by business types, potential clients, and other well-to-do couples, all discussing stocks and investment strategies. I'd dress up and join in, but always felt out of place chatting about hedge funds and big business ideas. "Jerry works at the power plant," Brianna would say when people asked. Her voice carried a hint of an apology, as though my job required explaining. Meanwhile, Dustin absolutely loved this new lifestyle. At 10, he could talk tech with Brianna's savvy friends. By 12, he was sharing wine opinions I couldn't afford on my own. By 14, he rolled his eyes at family camping trips, preferring Brianna's conferences in places like Denver and Salt Lake City. "Dad just doesn't get it," became his favorite phrase, spoken with the exasperation of someone who felt he was too worldly for ordinary life. Then came the major fallout on Dustin's 15th birthday. Brianna threw a party that resembled a corporate event, with gourmet food and entertainers teeming with her work connections and their kids. I wanted something low-key, like a backyard barbecue with Dustin's school friends. "This is over the top," I told her, watching as servers arranged extravagant floral displays. "He's only 15, not 50. She, fixing a centerpiece with the same determination she reserved for business deals, replied, "He's in a different world now, Jerry. These connections are important for his future." Her words stung. I remembered my 15th birthday as a fishing trip with my dad, a homemade cake, gifts wrapped in comic strips. Simple, but unforgettable. In Brianna's book, the party was a triumph. Dustin mingled with the adults, receiving lavish gifts like laptops and designer clothes, and even a bike that cost more than some cars. Yet I noticed him standing off to the side, looking a bit lost among the fancy crowd. "You okay?" I asked. He quickly morphed back into Brianna's socialite version of himself. "Yeah, of course. Why wouldn't I be?" But in that brief moment, I glimpsed the unsure kid beneath the facade, and it broke my heart. That party marked the start of a slow unraveling I couldn't prevent. Over the next 10 years, it felt like helplessly watching a landslide. Brianna's job consumed more of her time. Her energy and passion shifted towards work. Family dinners turned into phone calls. Holidays were sacrificed for client emergencies. Dustin's events clashed with board meetings, and she always chose work. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under," she'd say whenever I mentioned missing yet another of Dustin's games. "This business keeps us going. Tough choices have to be made." But I knew about pressure too, like keeping the power grid stable so thousands had electricity. My pressure had meaning beyond my own world. By the time Dustin graduated, I felt like I barely knew him. Brianna had shaped him into her ideal version. Prochet was sharp and driven, always ready to brush off anything that didn't help him chase his dreams. When I mentioned maybe considering trade school in addition to applying for college, he looked at me like I'd just suggested some absurd idea. "Dad, that's the kind of thinking that keeps you stuck," he said, sounding more like a self-help guru than a 17-year-old kid. "You chose to just get by, and I'm not making the same mistake." Those words stung. Settling, like 25 years of dedicating myself to our community meant absolutely nothing, as if being a reliable father was somehow embarrassing. College seemed to amplify that feeling. Dustin signed up for the business school, Brianna's alma mater, and during holiday breaks, He'd talk nonstop about market trends and self-improvement. The way he looked at our home, our lifestyle, our values, came with a barely concealed disdain. "You could be doing so much more, Dad," he'd say, as if being content was a flaw. He added, "Mom started with nothing and built an empire, and you've stayed in the same job for 20 years. I'd argue that some things were more important than money, but he'd already checked out. The major argument erupted during Dustin's last year in college. Brianna was pulling off 100-hour weeks on a big acquisition deal, while I handled everything at home: groceries, laundry, all the little things that kept us afloat. When she missed Dustin's graduation due to a work emergency, I finally confronted her. "This has to end, Brianna. Sometimes family needs to come first." She stood in our upscale kitchen, dressed in her work clothes at midnight, glued to the emails on her phone. "Don't tell me what matters. Everything we have, everything Dustin's accomplished is due to my hard work," I retorted. "And what about everything we've lost?" She glanced up from her phone, truly puzzled. "Like us, like being a family and not just a business deal." She stared at me for what felt like an eternity, and I could predict her words before she uttered them. We were no longer a family, just a partnership that was no longer working. "Maybe we should admit this isn't working anymore," she finally said. 6 months later, the divorce was final. Brianna's lawyers were thorough, efficient, and relentless. I got to keep the house on Maple Street. That little starter home she turned into extra rental income and enough money for a humble life. She got everything else, including Dustin's unwavering loyalty. "You're holding him back," Dustin told me, before leaving for Denver to work with Brianna. "This guilt over family values and simple living, it's damaging. I can't stay around that kind of thinking." So, I was left alone in the empty house, surrounded by boxes filled with memories, remnants of a life apparently unimportant to the ones I cared about the most. Now, 15 years later, as the afternoon light faded outside my apartment window, and my coffee had turned cold, shards of the broken ceramic lay scattered on the floor. Across town, preparations for the funeral of the woman who once promised me a future were underway, and I had no idea why she'd included me in her will. Those 3 days between Janet Morrison's call and the funeral felt like a temporary reality. I'd tidied up my apartment twice, ironed my one decent suit, and practiced conversations I was unlikely to have. Every morning I considered not attending, yet each night I convinced myself to show my respects, no matter what. Friday morning dawned cold and gray, typical May weather in Wyoming. I stood before my bathroom mirror, adjusting a tie I hadn't worn in 5 years, wondering how Brianna would view who I'd become. The reflection showed someone who looked older than I felt, with silver hair overtaking chestnut, and lines tracing the trails of quiet disappointments. The ride to Riverside Memorial Chapel took 20 minutes through neighborhoods showcasing Rock Springs' economic differences. My simple apartment building gave way to middle-class neighborhoods, and finally, to the manicured lawns and stately stone houses of Brianna's world. The chapel perched on a hill overlooking the town, its Gothic architecture exuding an air of durability and wealth. The circular drive was packed with cars, Mercedes sedans, BMW SUVs, even a few Teslas likely worth more than I ever made in my best year. I parked my aged Honda, nearly 15 years old, in between a shiny Lexus and a grand Cadillac, feeling awkwardly out of place at an event that belonged to someone else's world. The chapel practically glowed with wealth, flaunting its rich mahogany benches, vibrant stained glass, and flowers displayed like masterpieces. The room was packed with over 200 people, their conversations a mix of respectful sorrow and subtle networking. I saw a few familiar faces from business events Brianna and I attended back when we were together, but most were strangers from her life after we parted ways. I quietly slipped into a seat at the back, hoping to go unnoticed until the service wrapped up. Yet my entrance stirred whispers, like dropping a stone into calm water. A woman in an upscale black ensemble discreetly nudged her friend, nodding my way. Snippets of their exchange reached me. Her ex-husband. Can you believe he showed up after what he pulled? Over time, stories about us took on a life of their own, painting me as the villain holding back a remarkable woman, the anchor almost drowning her aspirations. Eventually, I quit trying to set the record straight, letting them simplify our saga for those who craved simplicity. Then, a voice sliced through the murmurs. Dad. I turned to see Dustin storming down the aisle, disbelief and fury etched on his face. At 37, he had Brianna's sharp features and commanding presence, looking dapper in a suit likely more expensive than my monthly rent. His success was evident: expensive watch, flawless haircut, and the posture of someone who knew their place. What are you doing here? His voice echoed, silencing the room and drawing all eyes. I rose slowly to meet his stare. I came to pay my respects. You forfeited that right 15 years ago, he shot back, stepping closer, his cologne an intense, sophisticated scent. Mom wouldn't want you here. Maybe not, but I felt I needed to be. For what? To ease your conscience? To pretend you're grieving for those who know exactly what kind of husband you were? The room was silent, 200 eyes on us like the best show ever. That old feeling of being judged resurfaced, just like the last years of our marriage. But now, with nothing to lose, I stood my ground. I'm not here to cause trouble, Dustin. I'll stay out of the way and leave when it's over. You'll leave now. His voice was firm, drawing murmured agreement from the crowd. You embarrassed her enough while she was alive. Don't pretend to mourn now. I locked eyes with him, standing firm. The room buzzed with tension. Someone coughed. A phone hummed quietly on the wooden pew. But before I could respond, Dustin turned to the crowd, his voice as commanding as in a boardroom. I apologize for this interruption during our time of remembrance. He gestured at me dismissively, as if swatting away a fly. My father seems to have forgotten that divorce means you're no longer family. Heads nodded. Agreement was murmured. My face felt hot, but I stood firm. For those unaware, Dustin continued, catching momentum, this is Jerry Flores, the man who spent more than 2 decades stifling one of the most brilliant women our town has known. Mom built her empire, employing hundreds, while he clocked time and resented her ambition. Dustin, that's enough. My voice came out sharper than expected. Is it? Because I think they should know why you're here. He turned back to the crowd like a lawyer building a case. He took half her assets, gave nothing to her success, and for 15 years played victim while she created something amazing. The crowd was captivated, some nodding along, familiar people scattered through the room, old friends, neighbors from the past. None met my gaze. I supported him for years while he refused to evolve or take risks, never becoming the partner Mom deserved. And now that she's gone, he expects sympathy, acting like he was important in her life. Each word cut deep, not because they were baseless, but because they reduced 22 years of marriage to a simple narrative of blame and failure. I considered speaking up, explaining the complex mix of love and drifting apart we experienced. Honestly, what was the point in arguing? Everyone in that room already had their mind made up about the situation. My mother passed away creating something that will outlive us all, Dustin concluded with unwavering belief. She deserved a husband who lifted her higher, not someone dragging her down. Silence fell over the chapel. I just stood there, absorbing every disapproving glance. Part of me wanted to flee, to spare myself further embarrassment. But another part, the part that loved Brianna Chen more than anything, couldn't leave her farewell unfinished. Are you done? I asked gently. Dustin's eyes widened, clearly expecting me to retreat in shame. But as I stood my ground, his confidence started to falter. I loved your mom for 40 years, I stated, my voice echoing in the quiet room. 22 of those as her husband and another 18 wishing her the best, despite everything. I'm not here to claim anything or be the center of attention. I'm here because we made promises that still matter, and I'm honoring that. I sat back down, hands clasped. The silence hung heavily around me. Dustin lingered in the aisle, taken aback by my words. The service begins in 5 minutes. Someone, likely the funeral director, announced clearly, trying to restore order. Dustin gave me one more disdainful look before heading to the front pew reserved for family. As the chatter resumed, bits of gossip reached me. The audacity. Poor Dustin dealing with this. He should have stayed home. I stayed through the eulogy describing Brianna as an innovator who overcame challenges to achieve greatness, through the business associates' tributes to her leadership, and through the music celebrating triumph. When it ended, people offered Dustin their condolences while openly ignoring me. I lingered until most had gone before preparing to leave. Mr. Flores, a man, middle-aged and sharply dressed, approached me. Dan Morrison from Morrison Welsh & Associates. Could we have a word? As the final hymn played and the funeral director wrapped things up, a heavy weariness settled over me. Soon, I could slip away to my quiet apartment and try to put this humiliating day behind me. People started gathering their things. Dustin remained at the front, gracefully accepting sympathies like he was used to being in the spotlight. Eyes occasionally flicked my way, but most seemed to dismiss me as unimportant. I reached for my jacket when I heard a voice call out, "Mr. Flores." Dan Morrison came over, his suit immaculate despite the long service. Up close, he seemed younger than I had expected, perhaps around 50, with sharp eyes behind glasses and an assured presence. "Sorry for your loss," he said, extending his hand. "Dan Morrison, from Morrison Welsh & Associates." We exchanged a few words. "Thank you." I shook his hand, feeling his firm grip and steady gaze. "The service was a fine tribute. Brianna would have appreciated it." He paused, surveying the room for a moment. As the chapel emptied, Dan asked if we could chat with Dustin and me. We needed to discuss Mrs. Flores' estate, and before I could respond, Dustin joined us, his expression shifting from practiced grief to one of curious interest. "Dan, I was wondering when we'd discuss that," Dustin said eagerly. "Of course, these things take careful management," Dan replied, sounding like someone accustomed to delivering important news. "I need both of you to come to my office for the reading of your mother's will." "Both of us?" Dustin's eyebrows shot up. "Is that necessary? I mean, he's not—" He gestured vaguely toward me. "Your father is specifically named in the will, Dustin. Legally, he needs to be there," Dan explained, catching me off guard. "Am I mentioned in the will?" Considering everything between Brianna and me, it seemed unlikely. Probably just a formality, maybe related to an old debt or ensuring I had no claims on her estate. Quietly, I said, "I don't think it's necessary. I'm sure it's just a formality. You don't really need me there." Dan looked right at me. "I'm afraid you do, Mr. Flores. Mrs. Flores was explicit about who she wanted present for the reading. You and Dustin both need to be there." The way he said it left no room for debate. Dustin looked irritated, but brushed it off like someone confident there's nothing to fear. "All right, let's just get this done," he said, shooting an impatient glance my way. "Don't complicate things, okay?" We strolled 3 blocks to Dan's office, passing by old, weathered downtown Rock Springs buildings, witnesses to the town's ups and downs in the energy sector. Dan kept the conversation light and professional during the walk, mentioning the weather and the gathering at the service, steering clear of anything revealing what lay ahead. Dan's office occupied the top floor of a beautifully restored Victorian, complete with dark wood paneling and shelves filled with leather-bound books, a place exuding quiet, established success. Certificates and degrees hung on the walls, interspersed with photos of Dan with prominent local figures and business leaders. It was the kind of setting Brianna would have favored, elegant, not flashy, successful yet respectful of tradition. "Please take a seat," Dan said, gesturing to two leather chairs by his mahogany desk. Dustin claimed the chair closest to Dan, leaving me the one slightly to the side, fitting for my part in this situation. Dan eased into his chair behind the desk, opening a hefty file with the practiced ease of someone who's done it countless times. Afternoon sunlight streamed in, highlighting the dust motes, tiny spirits floating in the sudden quiet. "Before we begin," Dan adjusted his glasses, "I want to offer my condolences once more. Brianna wasn't just a valued client, she was a friend. Her passing is a tremendous loss for us all." Dustin nodded solemnly, while I kept silent, uncertain how to express my feelings, given my complicated connection to her. Picking up the top document, bound in an official manner, Dan started reading. "This is the last will and testament of Brianna Elizabeth Flores, signed March 15, 2024, and witnessed according to Wyoming law. It replaced any earlier wills, just updated 14 months ago." I couldn't help but wonder why Brianna had made changes so recently. Was she sick, or did something prompt her to consider her mortality? The will confirmed that Mrs. Flores was of sound mind when preparing these documents, free from undue influence. Dan's voice had that formal legal ring, each word pronounced clearly. Dustin leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped together. You could sense his eagerness, ready to inherit the legacy his mother had built. Moving to the next page, Dan's glasses caught the sunlight as he continued reading in that steady, professional tone. "I hereby..." "These are my specific bequests and gifts," Dan read, maintaining a calm and clear voice. "To my beloved son, Dustin Michael Flores, I leave the family home at 847 Hillrest Avenue, along with all furnishings, artwork, and personal items." Dustin's face lit up with delight. The house on Hillrest was valuable, worth around $800,000. It was a stunning home with mountain views, perfect for hosting his business associates. Dan went on. "Additionally, I leave Dustin $500,000 to be transferred from my main investment account within 60 days after the will is probated." $500,000 plus the house? I watched Dustin's reaction closely. His smile flickered slightly. While definitely pleased, he seemed to be calculating. Sure, $500,000 was a lot, but his mom's business was worth even more. So, where was that? What about the company? "That's great, of course," Dustin said, striving to keep any trace of uncertainty out of his voice. "But what about Mom's business, the company?" Dan moved to the next page, keeping a neutral look. "Let's finish with the specific bequests, Dustin. Please let me complete this part." I shifted in my chair, feeling like an outsider in what was clearly a family matter. $500,000 was more cash than I ever imagined coming across. Between that and the house, Dustin was set for a very long time. It made sense. He was Brianna's son, groomed to carry on her legacy. Dan kept on reading and said, "Dustin's inheritance comes with some conditions. He has to stay working at Flores Consulting Solutions for 2 years, from when this will take effect, or until the company is either sold or shuts down." Dustin looked genuinely perplexed. "Conditions? What kind of conditions? And why until the company's sold? Who would do that?" Dan, staying calm, responded, "This is your mom's will, Dustin, not mine. I'm just reading what she wrote." It was then that I noticed the tension in the room starting to build. Dustin's confidence seemed to wither as his hands repeatedly opened and closed in his lap. With every intention to keep out of it, I unknowingly leaned in closer. "So, let me clarify," Dustin spoke with an all-too-familiar tone from a past disagreement. "I get the house and $500,000, but there are strings attached? And what's this about the company being sold? She would never sell her life's work." Dan took off his glasses and meticulously cleaned them, perhaps giving us a moment to absorb the situation. Once he put them back, he looked between Dustin and me. Your mother's will has instructions for dividing her leftover assets too, he said. This includes the company, her investments, and some major holdings. All right then, let's hear it, Dustin said, sounding impatient. Dan's uneasy tone made me worry we were headed into tricky territory. His careful words and almost apologetic tone reminded me of how one might sound when giving someone bad news. Before I continue, Dan started, settling back in his chair. It's important to note that these documents reflect Mrs. Flores's final wishes. She thought these out and clearly communicated them. There was silence, broken only by the ticking of an old clock on Dan's bookshelf. Dustin kept his eyes glued on Dan, on edge, while I wondered why Brianna asked me to be part of what seemed like a straightforward family matter. As Dan picked up the third page of the will and skimmed it, he addressed both of us. However, he said, his voice heavier than before, there are some additional terms here that significantly alter how Mrs. Flores's estate is divided, Dan went on, adjusting his glasses and meeting my gaze for the first time since we walked in. His eyes held something that unsettled me, a mix of empathy and obligation, as if I was about to hear something I wasn't prepared for. With a heavy tone, Dan pushed forward, laying out the serious details. The will specifies what should happen with the rest of Mrs. Flores's assets, which make up the largest part of her estate. Dustin leaned in more, grabbing onto his chair's armrests. Okay, let's hear about the company and her other investments. Dan refocused on the paper, clearing his throat like he was about to reveal something big. To my ex-husband, Jerry Michael Flores, he read out loud, each word hitting the quiet room like a stone dropping into water. My jaw dropped, and I couldn't control it. $33.5 million, such an unbelievable sum, it seemed like a dream, as if it couldn't possibly apply to anyone in a lawyer's office in Rock Springs, Wyoming. There must be some mistake, I managed to say, my voice sounding distant and like someone else's. 33 million? 33.5 million? Yes. Dan kept a steady, professional demeanor, though there was a knowing look in his eyes. Not surprised, more like watching a predictable disaster unfold. Dustin's face went from pale to red, as if his body couldn't decide what to do next. What did you just say? Dan seemed intent on getting through all of it, continuing with the reading. On top of that, I give Jerry Flores the controlling interest in Flores Consulting Solutions, along with all related businesses, properties, and business assets. That means 65% of all businesses, and he's set as chairman of the board of directors. I couldn't catch my breath. It felt as if the room was tilting, like gravity had gone haywire. Controlling Brianna's company, the enterprise I'd seen her build from nothing, the very business that wrecked our marriage and left me feeling inadequate. And now she was leaving it all to me. This isn't right. I could barely get the words out. There's got to be some paperwork mistake. You're mistaken, Mr. Flores, Dan assured, removing his glasses and giving them a clean as if it was a ritual. These papers were crafted with Mrs. Flores directly involved. She went over every word several times and confirmed they were exactly what she wanted. Dustin leaped up, his chair rolling back and banging against the wall. No way! This can't be true. His eyes locked onto mine, a mix of disbelief and something darker swirling in them. What did you do? How on earth did you make her sign off on this? My voice came out shaky, barely a whisper. I haven't spoken to your mother in 15 years. I did nothing. Dustin's words cut sharp, like an accusation. People don't just hand over $33 million to their ex-spouses for no reason. You must have twisted her arm when she wasn't well. Dan halted Dustin's spiral into panic with a composed voice. Let me make it clear. Mrs. Flores was fully competent when she signed. She even completed a mental evaluation, just to prevent anyone from challenging the will later. I stayed seated, feeling like I was watching someone else's life unfold before me. $33.5 million, and the reins of a huge company were far removed from my everyday concerns about bills and car troubles. "But why would she do this?" I blurted out, driven by sheer confusion. Dan gathered up the documents, stacking them with practiced precision. "Following Mrs. Flores's exact instructions on that matter, I'm to read a personal message left for you," Dan said, turning to me with a seriousness that punctuated his words. Dustin's face twisted in frustration and betrayal. "A personal message for him? She leaves him everything, but I get ignored in all the significant parts?" he snapped. "Did you get a big inheritance, Dustin?" Dan calmly countered. $500,000 in properties is no small sum." Dustin pointed an accusing finger at me. "Seriously? Compared to his share, that's peanuts. We're dealing with assets worth hundreds of millions. The company alone is monumental." The atmosphere tightened, almost suffocating. My mind spun at how my world had flipped upside down, yet all I could grasp was that Brianna, fiery and determined Brianna, who seemed to have nothing but disdain for me, had somehow entrusted her entire legacy to me. Then Dustin reached his limit. "This is fraud," he shouted, his voice cracking. "This is legally fraudulent. She was manipulated, taken advantage of." He turned to me, his face a storm of disbelief and fury. "You had a hand in this. There's no other reason." I was rooted in place, stunned by the fury he spewed. "Dustin, honestly, I haven't spoken to your mom. I wasn't even aware she was sick," I said, taken aback by the accusations. He accused anew, slamming his fist on the desk, scattering papers. No one just hands off their life's work to someone who left, someone who didn't even show up when she was dying. "She didn't walk away from anything," I said, mustering some resolve. "Our marriage ended, but that didn't mean what you think it meant." "You deserted us," Dustin shot back, escalating his anger. "You took a pitiful settlement and disappeared while she built an empire. And now you expect me to believe she gave it all to you?" Dan interjected, maintaining his authority. "Mr. Flores, Dustin, I understand this is tough news, but you need to stay composed. Your mother's wishes are clearly documented." Dustin looked at Dan, eyes alight with challenge. "I want every document scrutinized. Get psychiatric evaluations too. I need to know of any contact this man had with my mom over the past 5 years." "There was no contact," Dan said evenly. "Mrs. Flores was transparent about that when explaining her decision." "Explaining her decision," Dustin said, voice dripping with irony. "So she had her reasons for betraying her only child to pass everything on to the man she divorced." "Yes, she left your father a personal message," Dan quietly affirmed. The term father hit Dustin like a blow, momentarily dousing his anger, but sharpening the pain on his face, which tugged at my heart. Yet the rage resurged, fiercer than before. "He's not my father," Dustin barked. "My real dad would have stood by her, supported her ambitions, not undermined her." He turned back to me with a face full of long-held grudges. "You're nothing but a failure who couldn't handle being with someone out of your league." His words stung, not just because they hurt, but because there was a ring of truth to them. During our last years together, I always felt overshadowed. I struggled with Brianna's successes and couldn't quite fit into the world she was creating. "Maybe you're right," I whispered. "Maybe I was a lousy husband, but I didn't ask for any of this. I never saw it coming." Dustin's voice got higher. "Didn't see it coming? You must have planned this. Somehow you got to her when she was weak and scared." Dan stepped in, his usual calm demeanor starting to break. "That's enough, Dustin. Mrs. Flores was neither vulnerable nor unwell when she made her decisions. In fact, she was more focused than she'd ever been." "But why?" Dustin's voice was shaky, thick with emotion. "Why would she do this to me?" he asked, desperate and lost. "I did everything she ever wanted. Worked at her company, lived the life she laid out, became the son she could brag about." His words cut through my own disbelief. Despite years of bitterness, public humiliation, and harsh words, I finally saw it. A man who had spent his adult life chasing his mother's approval, only to find out she had acknowledged someone else in the end. She left a note explaining why. Dan said gently, "Would you like me to read it?" Dustin's hands shook, holding back all his anger and pain. A note. She couldn't tell me in person, but left a note for him. "Actually, it's addressed to both of you. She wanted it read after the will," Dan said. My voice was shaky when I finally spoke up. Maybe we should hear what she has to say." Dustin's eyes blazed with resentment, glaring at me. "You shouldn't even be here. You don't deserve any of this." Yet behind his harsh words, I could see his eyes begging to understand why his mother shattered everything he thought he knew about his place in her life. Dan pulled out another envelope, marked "Personal Message" in Brianna's familiar handwriting. Using the commanding tone he wielded in high-stakes courtrooms, Dan ordered, "Enough, both of you." His voice sliced through the tension. "Before this goes any further, I have something that will clarify everything." Opening the envelope marked in Brianna's distinctive style, he removed several sheets of elegant paper. Brianna knew this moment would be tough and had asked him to read her personal words following the will. Dustin collapsed into his chair, his anger giving way to a need for answers. I remained standing, unsure whether to hope for clarity, yet eager for an explanation that might shed light on this bewildering situation. Dan cleared his throat and started reading Brianna's words. "My dear Jerry, if you're listening to this, it means I'm no longer around, and you're likely in Dan's office, questioning your sanity. I can picture your expression, just like when I rearranged the living room without telling you. A little bewildered, but trying to maintain composure." Hearing her voice through Dan's reading made her seem so present, and I couldn't help but smile slightly at her spot-on description of my confused look. "I know you didn't expect this inheritance. You're probably thinking it doesn't belong to you, that the money and responsibility should go elsewhere. But it's meant for you, Jerry, and I'll explain why." Dan took a moment to look at the both of us before reading further. "I never stopped caring for you, even during our worst times. Not in the fights, not after the divorce, and not in the silence of these past 15 years. I was furious you couldn't support my dreams, but more upset at myself for choosing them over our marriage. You fought for us, Jerry. You asked me to find balance, to hold on to what truly mattered, but I was too stubborn and afraid to hear you." Each word struck deeply. Tears overflowed as years of guilt and regret were packed into this moment of unexpected forgiveness. "Dustin," the note went on, making my son whip around at hearing his name. "My smart, wonderful boy. I know you're really upset right now, thinking your father fooled me somehow. But sweetheart, this inheritance isn't something you're ready for just yet." Dustin's face cycled through an array of colors, from white to red, as his emotions hit him too quickly to process. "Your whole grown-up life has been about enjoying my success, without realizing what responsibility it takes. You haven't started from scratch or made the hard calls that come with wealth. Plus, you've wrongly accused and been mad at a good man." "That's not true," Dustin mumbled, shaky. But Dan kept going, continuing Brianna's message. "He showed me what true character looks like, honesty and a type of strength that doesn't feel the need to be mean or critical to prove itself. Those lessons slipped my mind when I picked money over my marriage and business over love. But the man who taught them stayed in my memory." Tears streamed down my face, and I couldn't care less how it looked. Brianna's words were fixing something inside me I thought was shattered forever, the belief that I mattered, that living a quiet life of dignity and service was meaningful. "Dustin, you've got enough to live comfortably and figure out who you are without the uphill battle of endless wealth. Learn to create on your own. Learn to appreciate people over profit. Learn to forgive your father for his human imperfections." Dustin let out a small, pained sound, but I couldn't tell if it was anger or hurt. Jerry, you're inheriting more than money. You're getting the chance to do what I should have. Use wealth as a positive force, not a tool for showing off. I trust you because this is something you never wanted. You won't ever misuse it like I occasionally did. The message continued for several more paragraphs, outlining arrangements and hopeful wishes for our future. But the core message was clear. Brianna had gone for love over entitlement, character over expectations, and wisdom over riches. When Dan stopped reading, a heavy silence filled the room. I sat there, tears streaming, overwhelmed by the truth that Brianna had loved me until the very end. Dustin stared at the ground, his whole perspective seemingly falling apart. Eventually, Dan neatly folded the letter back into its envelope. She asked me to give you this, Jerry. The original is yours to keep. I reached for the letter with trembling hands, holding on to the final words from the woman who had sculpted my life in such beautiful and painful ways. Brianna's words settled over the office like the dust after an explosion. We sat in silence for several minutes. I clutched her letter to my chest, feeling the tangibility of her final gift, not just the wealth, but the validation of my worth in her eyes, and, importantly, in mine, too. Dustin broke the silence. "This isn't over," he said quietly, but his tone missed its usual edge. "I can challenge this, claim mental incompetence, undue influence, fraud. There are ways to contest a will." I looked at him closely, for the first time since we'd sat down in Dan's office. I saw someone who always expected the world to fall in line with his desires, never realizing you can't demand love. It has to be earned. "You could try," I said gently. "But your mom was right, Dustin. You're not ready for this responsibility." "And you are?" His laugh was bitter and dry. "You're nobody, Dad. Just a retired power plant worker with zero business experience, no connections, and no clue about handling a company worth hundreds of millions." There was a moment when the old Jerry, the one who felt inadequate for 22 years, felt like agreeing with him. But Brianna's words rang in my head. "You deserve every penny." "Maybe you're right," I said, standing up slowly. "Maybe I don't know the first thing about running a business empire, but your mom valued something more than business smarts." "What's that?" Dustin snapped back. "I get the difference between looking out for others and looking out for myself," Dustin said, his face scrunching up one last time in anger. "This is nuts. She was sick. She was old. Her mind wasn't all there." Dan interrupted calmly. "Your mom was 62, with no mental issues when she signed the papers. She went through thorough mental testing just to prevent challenges like the ones you're bringing up." "Then why?" Dustin's voice cracked like a kid's. "Why would she do this to me?" Suddenly, all I felt was compassion for this man who was, despite everything, still my son. "This wasn't done to you, Dustin. This was done for you. She wanted to give you a chance to discover who you are without the shadow of endless wealth looming over you." "I don't want that chance," he blurted out, driven by 15 years of feeling entitled and having high expectations. "I want what's mine." I told him gently, "It's all yours. We're talking $500,000 plus a house almost worth $1 million, more than most people ever see. What you thought was rightfully yours never was." Dustin stared at me for a moment, realizing how much had changed. The man he'd publicly torn down, the dad he'd written off, no longer cared for approval or understanding. "You think you've won," he said, fumbling with his coat and a quivering voice. "You think this makes you a hero?" "No," I answered, feeling it settle deep within. "I think it makes me responsible." At the office door, he seemed smaller than when he arrived. "This isn't over," he muttered. "Yes, it is," I softly replied. "It ended when your mom made her choice. The rest is up to you and what you do with the life she's given you." He slipped out without another word, leaving the soft click of the door to echo in the newfound quiet. Dan started organizing his desk, the noise of papers grounding us in reality. We have paperwork to deal with, accounts to move, board meetings to plan. The management team we have is excellent and ready to help ease you in." I nodded, still soaking it all in. "Dan, can I ask something?" "Of course." "Did she really love me even after all the mess?" He gave a genuine smile, the first of the day. "Jerry, she talked about you every time we met. Not about the divorce or issues, about you being the one who showed her that success without integrity is just failure." Leaving that office, I felt like a different person. The afternoon sun seemed warmer, the air fresher. There was work to jump into, responsibilities to embrace, a company to grow. But for the first time in 15 years, I felt ready. Justice, I realized, wasn't about getting back or proving something. It was about knowing that who you are is more important than what you own, that patience holds up against entitlement, and that love, real love, never dies. Brianna had seen all this, and with her final move, she gave me the chance to prove her right.